The United States Marine Corps doesn't garrison cities or occupied territory. That's the Army's job. Marines force entry where nobody wants them, seize beachheads, and hold ground until heavier forces arrive. After watching modern warfare evolve, the Corps ditched their tanks entirely and rebuilt for Pacific Island hopping against peer adversaries. This is every major weapon system the Marine Corps uses, from jets to cars. Soriferi.
We begin with infantry fighting vehicles and armored personnel carriers. ACV, Amphibious Combat Vehicle. The ACV finally retired the AAV in September 2025 after 53 years of service. The retirement ceremony at Camp Pendleton featured a Marine in an alligator suit standing in one of the turrets, because apparently that's how we say goodbye to tracked amphibious vehicles. The big shock around Motor T was the replacement having 8 wheels instead of tracks. It swims at the same 7 knots the AAV managed, carries fewer Marines per vehicle but costs a hell of a lot more. So why the change? The real push for change wasn't capability gaps, it was tragedy. In 2020, an AAV sank off the California coast during training, killing 8 Marines and a Navy corpsman. The investigation found maintenance failures, poor training, and safety oversight breakdowns that exposed how badly the 50-year-old platform had deteriorated. The ACV brings MRAP-level blast protection with that V-shaped hull, and the new ACV-30 variant mounts a 30mm cannon that actually gives amphibious assault some firepower. LAV-25 Light Armored Vehicle Family. The LAV-25 has been the Corps' Swiss Army knife since 1983, and Iraqi insurgents nicknamed these destroyers because they were smaller, faster, and had this nasty habit of showing up where nobody expected them. That 25mm Bushmaster became legendary for punching above its weight. LAV crews discovered their armor-piercing rounds could penetrate T-55 tank armor from the sides and rear, which is wild for what's basically a reconnaissance vehicle. These things hit 62 miles per hour and can swim at 6.5 knots, making them the fastest platforms in the Marine motor pool. The family includes variants for anti-tank, mortar, command, logistics, electronic warfare, and recovery, basically everything except making coffee. Cougar MRAP. Here's the number that changed the war. Marines reported 0 deaths and over 300 IED attacks on Cougars in 2004. Defense Secretary Gates saw that stat and immediately ordered thousands more. That V-shaped hull wasn't just deflecting blasts, it was bringing Marines home alive from hits that would have shredded a Humvee. The design traces back to South African mine warfare in the 1980s, and it proved so effective that by 2008, roadside bomb deaths dropped almost 90%. The trade-off was rollover problems from that jacked-up center of gravity, and Afghanistan's roads would sometimes just collapse under the weight. MATV MRAP, all-terrain. Oshkosh built the MATV specifically for Afghanistan's mountains where the big Cougars couldn't go, using independent suspension that lets each wheel move freely, like a Baja racing truck. One 82nd Airborne Lieutenant Colonel reported cutting a 4-hour trip down to 2 hours, which in Helmand Province is the difference between getting hit and getting home. Despite weighing over 25,000 pounds, it could hit 30 miles per hour in under 11 seconds thanks to that massive diesel engine. The program went from requirement to boots on ground in under a year, which is Pentagon acquisition at lightning speed.
Moving on to artillery, high-mobility artillery rocket system. The only rocket artillery the Marines operate, and the entire design came down to one requirement: fit it inside a C-30 so we can actually move the damn thing. HIMARS carries 1 pod instead of 2, fires 6 guided rockets or a single long-range missile, and the whole point is shoot and scoot before the enemy even figures out where you fired from. Ukraine turned it into a legend by smoking hundreds of Russian ammunition dumps, and now Marine rocket batteries are training for the same thing in the Pacific. Set up on an island, wreck some ships, and disappear before counter-battery fire shows up. M777, a 155mm lightweight towed howitzer. The Corps ditched the M198 and bought something helicopters could actually lift, which meant building a howitzer out of titanium that weighs half what the old gun did. The M777 is now the only tube artillery the Marines operate, and it proved its worth in Afghanistan, where gun crews set up on ridge lines the trucks couldn't reach. What makes it lethal is the Excalibur round, GPS-guided artillery that can drop a shell into a specific room from 25 miles out. When you can do that, artillery stops being area suppression and becomes surgical strikes. Naval Strike Missile Launcher System. The Marine Corps bet the entire Pacific strategy on this: small teams with anti-ship missiles denying ocean to enemy fleets. It's a remotely operated JLTV carrying 2 Norwegian missiles that can sink destroyers from 100 miles away. And the concept is pure force design. Hide on contested islands, wait for targets, fire and relocate before anyone retaliates. The system already deployed to Japan and the Philippines, which tells you exactly where the Corps thinks the fight is coming. The whole setup fits in a C-130 or gets lifted by helicopter, reaching places coastal defense batteries never could. M224 60mm mortar, company-level mortar that you can fire from a bipod or from your shoulder when things get sporty. Weighs 46 pounds set up properly, or 18 pounds if you're willing to handheld it and deal with the recoil. When your platoon is taking fire in a valley and air support is 30 minutes out, the 60mm section dropping rounds in under a minute is what keeps people alive. It won't reach past 3,000 meters, and it won't replace real artillery. But for close-in fires when you need high explosive on somebody right now, this is what company commanders reach for. M252 battalion mortar that hits the sweet spot, powerful enough to wreck fighting positions but light enough that Marines can break it down and carry it. The Corps calls it the CO's hip pocket artillery because it belongs to the battalion commander, not the artillery regiment, which means when you need fire support, you don't have to fight through layers of coordination. Your 81 starts shooting before anyone else picks up the radio. Iraq and Afghanistan taught mortar platoons to operate as two-gun teams instead of full batteries, spreading across more positions and responding faster to whoever is in contact.
Moving on to air defense systems, Marine Air Defense Integrated System. The Marine Corps spent 2 decades fighting enemies with no air force, ditched all their air defense systems, and then suddenly realized cheap drones were everywhere and they had nothing to shoot back with. MUS is the fix. 2 JLTVs working as a team with one carrying Stinger missiles and a 30mm cannon, the other packing radar and electronic warfare to track and jam threats. The system just started fielding in 2025, after Marines watched ISIS fly commercial quadcopters over their bases in Iraq and realized air supremacy wasn't guaranteed anymore. It's designed to keep pace with infantry and protect dispersed units from helicopters, attack aircraft, and the drone swarms that are rewriting how modern wars get fought. LAMUS, Marine Air Defense Integrated System. This is the lightweight version mounted on Polaris MRZRS that fits inside Ospreys and can reach places wheeled vehicles can't go. LAMUS made headlines in 2019 when one strapped to the deck of USS Boxer shot down an Iranian drone in the Strait of Hormuz by frying its control link with electronic warfare. The system uses 2 buggies working together. One finds drones with radar and cameras, the other jams their signals and breaks the connection to whoever's flying them. It's been operational since 2019 as the stopgap while waiting for the heavier MUS, and it's still relevant because sometimes you need air defense somewhere an armored vehicle can't reach. Medium-range intercept capability. The Marines looked at Forces 2030, realized they'd be holding contested islands while Chinese cruise missiles tried to obliterate them, and bought Israel's Iron Dome to solve the problem. MIRC fires the same Tamir interceptors that have been protecting Israeli cities since 2011, active radar-guided missiles that can knock down cruise missiles, rockets, and large drones out to 70 kilometers. The Corps paired it with their GAT radar and mounted everything on trucks so batteries can relocate before counter-battery fire shows up. This is the first medium-range air defense the Marines have fielded since the Cold War ended, and it fielded in 2025 specifically because the Pacific fight requires small units to survive without relying on Navy ships overhead.
Moving on to engineering and support vehicles. Medium Tactical Replacement Truck Family. Oshkosh built the Marines a truck that could go places normal cargo haulers can't, and Afghanistan proved it when commanders started using MTVRs to transport Marines instead of supplies, because the off-road capability beat everything else available. The armored variants came with a cargo bay capsule nicknamed the Armadillo that turned logistics trucks into protected personnel carriers, and the Wrecker variant became critical for recovering those massive MRAPs that smaller tow trucks couldn't handle. LVSR, Logistics Vehicle Heavy Truck Family. This 10-wheeled monster replaced the Marines' old heavy hauler from the 80s, and it's built on the same platform as the MTVR, so mechanics don't need completely different skill sets to maintain the medium and heavy fleets. The cargo variant can load and unload itself with hydraulic systems, which means you don't need a forklift or crane sitting around to move containers and equipment. High-mobility, multi-purpose wheeled vehicle. The Humvee replaced the Jeep and became the face of American military power for a generation, and for good reason. When it hit the fleet in the 80s, it could go places nothing else could reach, while carrying serious loads. Desert Storm made it legendary, but Iraq and Afghanistan exposed the brutal truth that it was designed for Cold War mobility, not insurgent warfare. The original Humvee had aluminum doors and a soft top because speed and range mattered more than armor, which worked fine until IEDs became the primary threat. Up-armoring them made things worse. Bolting on thousands of pounds of plates turned them into slow, rollover-prone death traps that still couldn't survive roadside bombs. Marines who deployed in the early 2000s remember watching those things get shredded en route Michigan, and the Corps has been replacing them with JLTVs ever since. The Humvee wasn't a bad vehicle, it just got asked to do a job it was never built for, and a lot of good people paid the price for that gap. Joint Light Tactical Vehicle. The JLTV is what the Humvee should have been if it had been designed this century. Built from day one with armor and blast protection instead of bolting plates onto a vehicle that was never meant to take punishment. Oshkosh won the contract by proving their design could survive IED blasts that would shred a Humvee. And the independent suspension means it can actually go off-road at speed without beating crews senseless. The Marines are replacing Humvees with these as fast as they can, because the difference in survivability isn't incremental, it's the gap between walking away from an ambush and not coming home at all. MRZR, Ultra Light Tactical Vehicle. Polaris took their civilian Ranger side-by-side, give it some camo paint and a military contract, and the Marines bought it because it fits inside an Osprey's cargo bay. That's the entire selling point. You can fly one into a remote landing zone and immediately have wheels on the ground for a fire team that needs to move faster than walking. It offers zero protection, barely any cargo capacity, and sounds like an angry lawnmower. But when you're setting up an expeditionary advanced base on some Pacific island and need to shuttle gear between positions, a four-wheeled ATV beats carrying everything on your back. Buffalo, Route Clearance and Mine Protection. The bomb squad's best friend with a 30-foot robotic arm that lets EOD teams investigate IEDs without anyone stepping outside. It's slow and ungainly, but these trucks completed over 1,000 route clearance missions without losing a single crew member, because that articulated arm meant crews could handle suspected bombs from complete safety inside the armored capsule. Husky, Route Clearance and Mine Detection. The Husky is the smaller vehicle that drives ahead of Buffalo and route clearance teams, using ground-penetrating radar to find buried IEDs before convoys roll over them. It's basically a mine detector on wheels with just enough armor to protect the crew when they're deliberately hunting for explosives. And the whole concept is trading heavy protection for the ability to move fast and cover more ground. Route clearance teams would send the Husky out first to map where the bombs were buried, then bring in the Buffalo to actually deal with them. Armored Combat Earthmover. Combat engineers need to dig fighting positions, breach obstacles, and clear routes while people are actively shooting at them, which is why the Marines bought an armored bulldozer that can work under fire. The M9AC does everything a civilian dozer does except the crew sits behind armor instead of getting picked off by snipers. P-19R ARFF. These are the specialized firefighting trucks that sit at Marine EMA fields waiting for the emergency that hopefully never comes. A Harrier with a bad landing, an Osprey catching fire, a jet going off the runway. Oshkosh built them with the same firefighting tech from their civilian airport trucks, but ruggedized for expeditionary airfields where you might be setting up on a dirt strip in the middle of nowhere. Most Marines will never see one in action, but when an aircraft emergency happens, this truck and its crew are the difference between saving the pilot and watching the whole bird burn.
Next up is fighter and attack aircraft FA-18 Hornet. The Hornet replaced the Phantom in the early 80s and spent nearly 40 years proving it could do everything. Air-to-air, air-to-ground, close support, strike missions, all from carrier decks or forward bases. What separated Marine Hornet squadrons from Navy or Air Force aviation was the mindset. Every Marine aviator learns to be an infantry officer first at basic school, so when they're dropping bombs, they're not thinking about targets, they're thinking about that Lance Corporal taking fire below them. The jet flew everything from Libya to Desert Storm to 20 years of counterinsurgency in Iraq and Afghanistan. But by the end, the fleet was falling apart because these things were designed for one lifespan, and the Corps was pushing them way past it just to keep jets in the air until the F-35 showed up. The final Marine carrier deployment happened in 2021, and the last squadrons are converting over now. F-35 Lightning II, the first fighter in history that can land vertically, go supersonic, and stay invisible to radar, all in the same aircraft. The Marine version uses a lift fan and swiveling engine nozzle to hover and drop straight down onto ship decks and dirt strips, which sounds like science fiction, except it actually works. This is what Force Design 2030 was built around, the ability to put fifth-generation stealth anywhere the Corps can land, whether that's an amphibious assault ship, the contested island with a short runway, or a full carrier deck. Pilots who flew Harriers say that jet required constant attention to keep stable in a hover, while the F-35 does it automatically and feels effortless. It's replacing both the Hornet and Harrier, and it fundamentally changes what Marine aviation can do because you can penetrate advanced air defenses, find targets the enemy doesn't know you're tracking, and deliver precision strikes without ever being seen. AV-8B Harrier II. The jump jet proved you could operate fast jets from ships and forward bases where conventional fighters couldn't go. And it's been doing exactly that since the mid-80s through every major conflict. Gulf War, Bosnia, Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Syria. The aircraft lands vertically on amphibious assault ships in bare dirt strips, gets bombs on target when Marines need close air support immediately, and redeploys before the enemy knows where it came from. It's been upgraded constantly with better sensors and precision weapons, but the design is 40 years old, and there's only so much you can do with that, which is why the F-35B is taking over. The final squadron flies its last mission in June 2026, and when those Harriers land for the final time, it closes the book on the aircraft that taught the Marine Corps how to put jets on small decks and actually keep them flying.
Moving on to support aircraft, KC-130 Hercules, the tanker and cargo hauler that keeps marine aviation flying, whether that's refueling Hornets over Iraq, dropping supplies into dirt strips in Afghanistan, or medevacing wounded Marines from places helicopters can't reach. During the siege at Khe Sanh in '68, KC-130s delivered 4,600 tons of cargo over 70 days, while taking anti-aircraft fire on approach. 64 aircraft got hit multiple times in the cockpit on final, but the crew kept it flying and landed anyway. The J model can refuel 2 aircraft simultaneously using wing-mounted drogue pods, land on rough strips to deliver cargo, and even mounts Hellfire missiles in a targeting pod in the Harvest Hawk configuration for close air support. In the Gulf War, a tanker crew launched in zero visibility to rescue 4 Hornets that were running out of fuel with nowhere to land, and all 5 aircraft made it back safely. This jet does everything: tanker, cargo hauler, medevac, gunship, command post, and if the only long-range transport organic to the Marine Corps. F-5 Tiger II, the aggressor jet that teaches Marine and Navy pilots how to fight by playing the enemy. These small fighters were bought used from Switzerland and upgraded specifically to simulate Soviet and Chinese aircraft in training. They're the right size and performance to mimic a MiG-21, they're hard to see, and they're agile enough in a dogfight to make pilots work for every kill. The Marines operate them through VMFT-401 at Yuma, and the whole point is realistic training against dissimilar aircraft flown by pilots who know enemy tactics cold. These are the jets that play the MiGs and Top Gun, and in real training missions, the aggressor pilots are paid to make you lose first, provoke errors, create confusion, push you to apply procedures under stress. The Corps just took delivery of 22 more from Switzerland to keep the fleet flying through 2028, because you can't train modern pilots by only fighting against aircraft that look and fly like yours. C-40 Clipper. The Marine Corps bought 2 used Boeing 737s, converted them into military transports, and delivered them to VMR-1 in 2023. These replaced the old C-9 Skytrains that had been flying since the 70s. The Clipper can switch between all passenger, all cargo, or mixed configuration, depending on what the mission needs that day. Marines operate them out of Hawaii now, supporting Indo-Pacific Command logistics, moving commanders, critical cargo, and personnel anywhere in theater with enough range to reach most destinations without refueling. It's basically a commercial airliner with a cargo door and military communications, which makes it cheaper to maintain than purpose-built military transports. C-20 Grey Ghost Gulfstream business jet the Marines use to move senior officers and small VIP delegations when you need something faster and more comfortable than a cargo plane. Based on the Gulfstream 4 civilian model with military communication systems added. The Marines operate a few of them out of Hawaii for Pacific Command support. It's called Grey Ghost because of the paint scheme and because most Marines will never see one. These live in a different world than the rest of the Corps. Seats about 26 passengers, flies coast to coast without refueling, and gives generals an office in the sky when they need to work while traveling. UC-35 Citation, military version of the Cessna Citation business jet used for small executive transport and operational support missions. Smaller and more flexible than the C-20, can land at airports where larger jets can't operate. The Marines use these to move small teams, critical cargo, or mid-level commanders when the mission doesn't justify a full-size transport. It's the kind of aircraft that stays busy: courier runs, medical evacuation, moving spare parts to forward bases. Most Marines never interact with it, but the ones who need it are glad it exists. UC-12 Huron, military version of the Beechcraft King Air turboprop that's been hauling people and cargo since the 70s. Twin engine, can carry 8 passengers or light cargo, and operates from shorter runways than jets require. The Marines use these for utility transport when you need something reliable but don't need jet speed. Think of it as the pickup truck of marine aviation, does the practical work without complaining. T-34 Turbo Mentor, the basic trainer that taught generations of Navy and Marine pilots how to fly before they moved up to jets. Single-engine turboprop that looks ancient, but that's intentional. Student pilots learn fundamentals in something simple and forgiving before touching anything expensive. Been in service since the 50s, the Marines still operate a handful for basic flight training and light support missions. Most primary flight training moved to civilian contractors years ago, but the T-34 still flies because sometimes you need a simple airplane that just works. It's not meant to be impressive, it's meant to teach young officers how to not belly flop an aircraft before they get to the aircraft that cost $50 million.
That brings us to helicopters, an H-1Z Viper. The Marines rebuilt the Vietnam-era Cobra into something completely different, the only attack helicopter in the world that carries air-to-air missiles, 2121. It shares 85% of its parts with the Venom utility helicopter, which means half your logistics footprint works for both aircraft. That's huge when you're operating from ships where space is limited. Recently, they've been testing a missile that can strike targets 200 miles away, which fundamentally changes what an attack helicopter does. You launch from over the horizon instead of getting close enough to take fire. 2142. UH-1Y Venom. This is the modern Huey. The Marines took the old twin Huey and rebuilt it with composite rotor blades, upgraded engines, and a glass cockpit. It does everything unglamorous that keeps operations running. Troop transport, supply runs, medevac, armed escort. It's not as famous as the big cargo helicopters, but it's everywhere doing the practical work. Shares most of its parts with the Viper, which makes maintenance easier when you're forward deployed. CH-53E Super Stallion. The Marines' heavy lifter has been moving their biggest equipment since the 80s. 3 engines, 7 rotor blades, enough power to pick up a light armored vehicle or a wrecked Harrier. By 2017, the fleet was falling apart. 40 maintenance hours for every flight hour because the Corps flew them way past their design lifespan waiting for replacements. Still in service alongside the new King Stallions because transitioning an entire fleet takes years. CH-53K King Stallion. The replacement for the Super Stallion costs more than an F-35, which has caused plenty of arguments, but there's no other way to move heavy equipment across the distances the Corps needs for Pacific operations. Can lift triple what the old helicopter could carry, which opens up possibilities that didn't exist before. Put artillery or air defense on islands that were too far to reach. Started deliveries in 2018, but won't finish replacing the old fleet until the early 30s. MV-22 Osprey. You're looking at a helicopter that decided to become an airplane mid-flight. The rotors tilt 90 degrees forward while it's airborne, which means it takes off like a Huey and flies like a cargo plane. The Marines replaced their entire fleet of CH-46C Knights with Ospreys and completely changed how they operate. Suddenly, you can reach targets twice as fast and 5 times farther than the old helicopters could manage. The downwash is so powerful, it's been known to blow people away from their landing point and destroy unprepared landing zones. It's also expensive and controversial. Crashes during development and operational use have killed dozens, but the Marines defended fiercely because there's no other way to get combat-loaded troops deep inland from ships at airplane speeds. VH-3 Sea King, the presidential helicopter that carried every commander-in-chief from Nixon through Biden. You've seen the footage. Green and white helicopter landing on the White House lawn, president walking down the steps. The Marines operated these for 60 years, hauling presidents around, and by the end, each one required massive maintenance just to stay airworthy. They finally retired the last one recently, after it flew Trump off the White House lawn for the final time. The Sea King started as a Navy submarine hunter and got converted into the most important no-fail mission in marine aviation. Multiple identical helicopters fly together, so nobody knows which one carries the president. VH-61 White Hawk, the smaller presidential helicopter based on the Black Hawk. The Marines use this one for overseas trips because it fits inside Air Force cargo planes better than the bigger Sea King. It's been flying presidents since the late 80s and still operates today alongside the new Patriot. The White Hawk works better in hot and high environments, think Afghanistan or the Swiss Alps, where the larger helicopters struggle with thin air. Folding rotor blades and tail let it pack into transport aircraft, then unfold and fly when the president lands somewhere. Less famous in the Sea King, but critical for keeping the president mobile anywhere in the world. VH-92 Patriot, the replacement that took 20 years and $5 billion to finally enter service. Based on a commercial Sikorsky helicopter, but modified with encrypted communications, ballistic armor, missile countermeasures, and nuclear pulse protection. Biden became the first president to fly one in 2024. Early testing revealed problems. The helicopter burned the White House lawn with its exhaust, had reliability issues, and struggled with the communication systems. The Marines still fly the old Sea Kings and White Hawks alongside it because the full transition won't finish until 2030. Larger than any previous Marine One helicopter, and the first with a rear ramp, but expensive enough that people questioned whether it was worth the cost.
Then we have unmanned aerial vehicles, MQ-9 Reaper. Flying surveillance over the South China Sea requires watching vast areas for days at a time, which is exactly what the Reaper does for Marine commanders who can't afford to burn through helicopter flight hours.
A single aircraft stays airborne 27 hours, covering disputed waters where Chinese ships harass Filipino fishing boats and testing international boundaries. The Marines stood up their first squadron in 2023 and now operate them unarmed from bases in the Philippines and Okinawa, feeding intelligence directly to ground commanders instead of waiting for Air Force approval. Medium tactical UAVs. Launch one from a catapult on a moving ship, watch it fly reconnaissance for 20 hours, then recover it by snagging a rope with its wingtip. These ship-based drones gave battalion commanders eyes beyond helicopter range during Iraq and Afghanistan, tracking insurgent movements and watching suspected IED sites without risking crews. Now they operate across Pacific Island chains, providing over-the-horizon surveillance for amphibious operations where manned aircraft would be overkill. Small tactical UAVs. A sergeant pulls one from his pack, tosses it into the air, and suddenly his squad can see over the ridge before walking into an ambush. Hand-launched reconnaissance put aerial surveillance directly into infantry hands without requiring specialists or higher headquarters. Battery-powered and quiet enough not to give away positions, they're disposable tools that let Marines check around corners and over walls before exposing themselves. Switchblade. Tube-launched, explosive-tipped, and operator-guided straight into the target. Marines started using these in Afghanistan to eliminate IED emplacers without sending convoys into danger zones. Launch the Switchblade, let it loiter overhead until it finds the target, then guide it in for the kill. The Corps now fields them as organic precision fires, giving rifle squads their own strike capability instead of waiting for mortars or air support to become available. KMAX. 2 unmanned helicopters spent 3 years hauling supplies to Afghan combat outposts at night without a single pilot at risk. They flew pre-programmed routes, delivered 4 million pounds of cargo to positions that would have cost lives to reach by ground. Improved autonomous logistics worked in combat. Marines rigged loads underneath while the helicopter hovered overhead completely unmanned. The program ended in 2014 when the aircraft returned home and went into storage, but they demonstrated what was possible. Micro-reconnaissance UAVs. Palm-sized drones fly through windows to show what's waiting inside before anyone enters. Urban combat used to mean clearing rooms blindly and taking casualties. Now Marines send a drone weighing less than an ounce through first, small enough to carry dozens, cheap enough that losing them doesn't matter, and anyone can fly one without training. And finally, the good stuff.